Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, my name is Sean Conroy, and I'm EVP of North America at Genius. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about monetizing the live moment and exploring new advertising models in soccer and in Liga MX specifically. And I'm pleased to be joined here by Dan. And Dan, maybe if you can introduce yourself briefly to the group.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dan Riess. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of TelevisaUnivision's U.S. ad sales business. And Sean and I have just completed a partnership, which will be exciting and we'll touch on. But in my job, I oversee pretty much everything that's not an actual seller. All our partnerships, all our ad tech, all our creative, and especially our path to monetization for most of our big IP, like we're talking about here.
And for context, for those of you who do not know Genius Sports, Genius are a technology business. And essentially what we do in our business is we partner with rights holders and leagues. We implement technology to produce sports data, and then we monetize that sports data through a variety of different channels: sports betting, media, and advertising. And the context of the conversation here and the relationship that we have just announced and formalized with Univision is how we are taking our data that we're producing through our relationship with Liga MX and turning that into new ad formats and driving ad innovation and the expansion of commercial inventory across Liga MX. So maybe as a starting point, I'm interested, Dan, in your perspectives on how fan behaviors, and particularly around Liga MX, are evolving, and what that means for your advertising partners in terms of addressing the audiences of today.
Great. How many of you guys know who and what Liga MX is? Okay. Liga MX is the club soccer league that's based in Mexico, play lots of games in the United States. It is, well, I'll ask another question. No, I won't. I'll skip the question. Liga MX is the most viewed club soccer league in the United States. So over 3x MLS, Major League Soccer. Bigger than English Premier League in terms of viewing, and by far the biggest club soccer league viewed. So you had asked about fan behavior. The first, I'll talk just for a minute. So TelevisaUnivision, you guys know who Univision is. We have, I think the first thing to talk about with soccer is in the United States, soccer is essentially a Hispanic sport, which may sound, it might be something you haven't heard before, but if you look at the viewing patterns, U.S. Hispanics account for over 60% of soccer viewing, total soccer viewing in the United States. So when you think about the most popular club soccer league, you're talking about Liga MX. When you think about the most top popular national team, it's not the U.S. men's national team, it's the Mexican national team, and not even close. So when you think about the audience, you're talking about a largely Hispanic audience who, with Liga MX, it is largely a driven by where you grew up in Mexico, driven by the region, driven by the team that you rooted for. It's highly nostalgic and it's it's very popular. And so the fan behavior has been on a growth path. It's grown with the audience as that audience has grown in the US, but it's also grown because I think of the action and what we've brought to the table with it, as we're constantly evolving both what we're doing on the ground, bringing the team more to the United States to play games, and then also how we're activating around that with marketing, with events, and then within the game, how we're broadcasting that game. So in general, you've got a very leaned in audience, really high engagement, deep, passionate fandom that goes, I don't want to say centuries, I'll say decades back and generations back in the family, to root for their team and to be part of that. So it's a pretty cool experience if you ever get a chance to go to one of the US games, or if you can go see at Estadio Azteca or one of the big stadiums in Mexico. It's shocking how big and awesome it is.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of seeing some Liga MX games in Mexico, and the atmosphere is astounding. Having watched a lot of soccer in the UK, Just the levels of fandom and passion and excitement you get on game day is pretty special.
Much better food. Promise.
um, Sports, and particularly Liga MX, is a appointment viewing for millions of people in the US. How do you think about capitalizing upon that fandom, that viewership, that engagement, um, in terms of building on sort of traditional commercial inventory sets in terms of advertising, in terms of monetization strategies, and how do you think, and what are the sort of things you're thinking about for growing and expanding and capitalizing upon that fandom and
Yeah,
engagement?
for sure. I mean, look, obviously the media business is driven almost singularly now by sports, by live sports. So, um, you have a lot more engagement from brands in all aspects of what we bring to the table for them, around various sports. I think with, especially with Liga MX, but with many on the soccer side, you also have, I mean, soccer is a different format than many fans in the United States are used to with football or basketball. There's literally no ads in the game, meaning there are no breaks. There's no natural breaks between other than halftime. So, just by nature, you're working with that format, in many different ways. And so we're pretty experienced with, virtual overlays and different types of formats and taking advantage of when they're faking an injury, bringing up, some people in the United States are still trying to get used to that. But when they're on the turf, on the pitch, faking an injury, you've got a moment to bring advertisers into, that offset the sort of natural format and of the beautiful game of soccer. So one of the things that I think is critical with sports is it's a moment driven business, right? There are points where fans are so engaged and so excited and so, sort of enwrapped with what's happening in their game that that it's a great place for advertisers, but it's also a dangerous place for advertisers, right? You don't want to get in the middle of all that passion. You want to add value to it. So the way we're thinking about it is, our litmus test is really what can we do, um, to bring a brand partner in, but also to add value to the fan and that experience and not get in the middle of their most exciting moment of the day or their most excited, passionate point of their team scoring a game winning goal or anything like that. And so I think we've started to look for partners. Genius is obviously a fantastic partner because allow us to use data to tell a story of the moment and to do that in the context of a brand. It could be how fast guys are running. It could be how much spin they have on the ball. It could be, kind of how fast they're kicking. But there's so many different data points coming off there that allow a brand to bring a story, that adds context to the game for the viewers. And so we're looking at it that way. The only other thing I'd say in response to that question is sports is a balance, and brands need to balance sort of things that um, things that are really easy to do and things that require a lot of elbow grease and work to get done. And so adding context beyond what you can do by just putting an ad in halftime or putting an ad before the game, adding context so that ad works harder when a consumer sees it, based on what they've seen in the action of the game is really important. And being able to make that easy for brands is really important. There's only so many resources they have to, do custom videos that spotlight a player at their store or whatever it is that they want to do. There's only so much bandwidth on the brand side to do stuff like that. So there's a turnkey aspect to this, and there's also a direct engagement right in the game as it's happening.
Yeah, and this is the role that Genius occupy, of
Yeah.
course, here in this relationship is. So one of the things that what we've built at Genius is a machine that understands the game of sport in real time. So what we're doing with Liga MX and the Premier League and dozens of other leagues around the world, we're implementing cameras in venue. So, for example, with Liga MX, we have 30 cameras installed within each venue. Those cameras are then producing video, stitching all of that video together, and then running a computer vision algorithm on top of the video, which is then turning what it sees into billions and billions of data points in hundreds of milliseconds. So, and that can be anything from player movement, speed, ball movement, passes, and not just passes, 10 different types of passes, defensive pressure, defensive space, shape, momentum. So we have this really, really rich insights engine that's coming out of the game of soccer. And what that means is it becomes an engine that can drive a lot of different use cases, right? If you're a coach of a Liga MX club, you can use that for insights and recruitment and player development and performance enhancement. But if you're creating media assets for advertisers, as Dan says, you are now creating a language and a story and a library of assets that different brands and advertisers can draw down on based on their story and their brand and the narrative that they want to tell around the game. So, for example, you're an insurance company and you want to tell stories about you want to tell defensive stories, right? It's not just how many tackles, but you're looking at press intensity, you're looking at spacing in between players. And so what you now have through this automated engine is a moments engine where you're cultivating and curating moments that are relevant to any particular brand.
Yeah, I think this is the topic of context, finding context within content and aligning advertisers with it, which I've been involved in for probably 2 decades. But I think the things that Genius is doing, as well as how technology overall is impacting how much data we have, and is a huge opportunity to find the right place to put brands in real time and do that. And we know, I've done so much research on this, but it's the priming effect. We know that when a brand is seen in a contextually correct and aligned environment for their story, we know that the next time that somebody sees their ad, they're going to be paying a lot more attention to that. Every metric that a brand wants is generally enhanced from that. And I've done over the course of my career probably 25, 30 different studies on this priming effect and how does it work. And the fact is that the closer you are to a heightened engagement point, a moment that really matters to the audience, that's also aligned with what the brand's trying to say, the better the next time they see that ad, that will be a much more impactful experience for the brand. They'll get much more out of their money.
And how important do you think, Dan, is the kind of live real-time nature of this? One of the things we think a lot about at Genius is our stakeholders, if you like, in the overall proposition, right? You've got the advertisers who are an important stakeholder, but you also have the fans, all right? And you need to present the game in a way that the fans are going to enjoy. And so when you are thinking about, like we are in the partnership that we've put together, we're actually creating content for the live broadcast. So we're taking this data, and then creating augmented ad overlays and graphical components that exist within the live broadcast. So we have to work very hard to convince producers, production teams that actually these are features that are going to be additive to the fan experience. And my sense is the benefit for that from an advertiser is that you're in the game, right? And as you said, soccer is a game, unlike football here in the United States, that doesn't have a lot of ad breaks, right? And so how important do you think that sort of journey is to try, the live nature of it and the ability to work within the constraints of a sort of, by definition with the sport, a relatively limited set of commercial inventory that you have?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this gets at like the heart of the history of contextual targeting and how kind of crappy it's been over time, because it's never really been real time, right? So there's a couple things coming together. One thing is the fan obsession over data in sports, right? Which has been driven by betting. It's been driven by fantasy sports. It's been driven by just new data that exposes incredible new stories to the fans. So the idea that we can now know and do a feature on top speeds of the various players in the first half of a match is amazing, right? The fact that we can tell, who's the long distance running champion of that half, who ran the most during that game, who covered the most ground, at what speeds. Those are things that fans find really interesting, especially when they can be done in feature form as well as spotlighted in the game. So there's a huge benefit to the fans that aligns with a real trend towards data seeking by the audience. And then there's this idea that for the first time in real time, you can put a brand in exactly the right moment at exactly the right time to make all the brand metrics dreams of the brand leads at their companies extremely excited. Right, contextual targeting has always been like kind of a hard coded, figure it out. It's never been applied to the most powerful medium in all of media, which is sports. It's always been kind of articles. I used to do it at movies when I was back at TBS and TNT, where we had things like cable channels, which if you guys raise your hand if you know what a cable channel is. We used to run movies. We used to have interns tagging every scene in the movie so that if there was a car crash, you could run an Allstate ad afterwards. And it worked. It worked incredibly well, but it was super clunky and hard to scale. And now all of a sudden, and by the way, those were reruns of movies on a cable channel. This is broadcast television, live, high passion sports content in real time, where we can align Powerade with the most powerful kicks of the game. For example,
And
Powerade.
and how do you think about, we think a lot about the overall fan journey outside of the environment of the live game. And, we talk a lot about moments that we want to highlight in the game, key contextual, events that are relevant within the game. We also think a lot about, when the game stops, my fandom doesn't stop, right? I'm still a Manchester United fan for my sins. And that fandom is relevant not just during the 90 minutes, but throughout the rest of the season. So there is also this concept this is something we're delivering via the Genius Moment engine is, okay, throughout the course of that season, you've got storylines developing, you've got transfers, you've got build up, you've got post game, you have a narrative that runs 24/7, 365 days a year. So how do you guys think about the use of data and stories and extending these campaigns beyond just the 90 minutes?
Yeah. So, I mean, soccer is super fragmented in the United States. There's dozens of leagues that people follow. There's national teams, there's club, there's Copa, everything. And I think that the key for us is how do we market our properties, our rights, Liga MX specifically in this case. How do we market that to fans outside just watch the game, promoting the game itself. And when I think about the content that we can make around sports, there's the game, right? There's the highlights around the game, and I'll come back to that. And then there's the sort of lifestyle elements around what are the players wearing when they show up? Who are they dating? Like all the, whole transfers, a whole ton of things around the game. But in this highlights is the closest in from a circle, if you take the bullseye and the next ring is highlights, and that has been always super popular on social platforms. This essentially, the way I look at it, helps us create an incremental additional form of highlight. Where it's not, hey, these guys scored this goal at this time and the score was this and that, and this was the MVP of the game. It's looking at, again, who was the fastest, what were the top speeds of the game, and a whole range of data that can allow for portable sort of fan interest and to be really excited about what they're learning about just in that second rung around the game itself. In my view, you could do a lot of things around sports, but to be as close to the game as possible is always going to be the best for marketing purposes, for fan engagement purposes, and for branding purposes.
You guys are Univision are heading into your upfronts, and so it's a big part of the kind of sales the big event for the sales year is coming up. In conversations that you've been having recently of late, you've touched on some of this, I think, in some of your comments. What do you think? What are the things you're hearing from your advertising partners? Sports obviously increasingly as important as ever, that contextuality. is there anything else that you're hearing and learning and seeing from some of your initial conversations around this type of new inventory, new commercial assets, and that you've found interesting or surprising as you've kind of started on this journey of taking this new set of inventory into your client base?
Yeah, a lot of things. I think, look, I think having talked about it, brands are definitely interested in being beyond the spot and in the game. They're cautious about their role in that, and so they're trying to figure that out. And this provides a pretty simple solution, I think, to do that in a really effective way. There's a lot of things happening around sports that are really, really intense right now. One is almost every brand that I talk to, and we have a brand studio at TelevisaUnivision that I oversee called Ussie Studios, and our job is to make content for brands associated with our IP that help them relate to our audience and be authentic to our audience. And so they are social first. Like the brand's job right now is to work in social media first, generate a ton of content for social media, and then port that out across platforms. And I think sports is the heyday of this. And they're asked, like, how can they do that at scale without having to like produce an entire video from scratch every single time and hire talent and do all that? So they're trying to find turnkey ways so that they can get the volume of content they need to engage an audience ongoing in social media that ties back to the IP that they love. And that's where I think we're seeing the most interest here, is it solves multiple challenges for them, kind of integration without all the work that it takes to kind of, we do a lot of different things at TelevisaUnivision. We do the Latin Grammy, and we have brands that own the third stage of the Latin Grammy. That is an extensive process. We have brands that have kind of a station on the red carpet. That's an extensive process. This is a simpler process that is, equally powerful in the places that brands need it to be, I think, which I think is really what I hear is like, oh, it's kind of like media in that I don't have to work that hard, and it works like an integration in that it's super ingrained in the content, and it's super authentic, and it's super like brand forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can own particular moments, right? This is something we've really heard, this ability to really own and attach yourself to very discrete, specific moments that are particularly relevant to your brand, I think is pretty compelling. Yeah. So kind of last question before we maybe open up to some Q&A from the audience. What do you think makes Liga MX a particularly strong environment to be deploying some of these next generation ad assets and commercial imagery? One of the things I am excited by and have always noticed as I look at the way Liga MX is merchandised and produced within the Mexican market there's a much more liberal approach to commercial integration within the Mexican market. A bit less so in the US, but still provides more of a sandbox to be experimenting around some of these.
You say it like there's NASCAR in terms of commercialization. You have NASCAR. You have on the other side of the scale, you have
NFL.
EPL and the NFL, and Liga MX is definitely on the NASCAR side in terms of what's allowed from an advertiser standpoint. The cool thing is that drives a ton of innovation. It drives a lot of experimentation, and basically they trust us, especially in the US, to be their partner to figure out what's right for the fan and what's right for the brand. So it's a lot less constricted. That means that brands need to break through because there's more happening. If you have ever watched a Liga MX match down in Mexico, you're going to definitely get the NASCAR experience in terms of amount of branding. So, I think this is a great place to experiment. And, I always look at it as like, there's only so many things you can put that have a brand on them in a game. And if you can find one that punches way above its weight, you can remove 3 other ones. So I always look at it as, how can we help the editorial team, kind of make sure that the right balance of commercialization is there with the fan experience. And I think this is a potentially a really powerful tool to help us do that.
Awesome. So I'm aware, Dan, you need to run almost immediately to the airport after this, but I think we probably have time, if there is anyone who wants to ask a question, to do a couple of questions from the audience. Here we go.
This one? No, it's wired. There he's going.
Can you give me an actual example of an ad run in between a soccer game where a forward fell running down to the goal? He could have scored, as an example, and then he fell down. And do you interrupt the game to put an ad in there?
It's a pretty delicate scenario, so we defer to our producers on the ground. And it's kind of a bet of like, how much is this guy going to writhe around on the ground in pain? And part of it is that most of the time they're not really in pain. So with soccer, or only partially in pain. So the way we do it is we defer to the producers. They have a list of things that they would pull up if they feel comfortable with the scenario and and it's not just injuries. Like, there's lots of times when it's yellow cards. It's a multiple array of things, where the play on the field stops. We never leave the game. We will do squeeze backs. I think it's a great place to talk about, some of the sort of genius powered features, and where we're lining up the fastest runs. I mean, sometimes we'll do squeeze backs and show highlights and recaps of things that happened earlier in the match that set up that moment. So it's pretty fluid. We're not sort of just waiting for someone to hit the turf so we can pull up an ad. I think it's much more, how do we make the fan experience good?
What's the format of the ad? Is it a corner of the screen, or?
There's a whole range. In general, are you asking about the ones that we're talking about here with the genius data?
Yeah, so I'm in between a soccer game.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can take this. Yeah, we do. So the way we have an engine, we call it an augmentation engine, and essentially what that does is it takes the data and the moments and the content as inputs, and then it uses AI rendering on top of the video to essentially place the graphics like on the field of play as it's happening. So you could, in theory, and we do this a lot, you can place a graphic below a player, above a player. You can track the ball on a pass and create a line. You can essentially draw whatever you want. The pitch is your canvas. Then your decision becomes, where am I comfortable inserting an ad or a sponsor message relevant to the field of play? So, what we will tend to do is we will tend to trigger the moments. Let's say it's the kind of defensive momentum execution that we talked about earlier. We will, once a certain team or player has got over some kind of threshold that makes it an interesting thing to reference, we will then augment the players, maybe create a relationship within the players graphically, and then have some content maybe on the bottom right that is branded. There's an ad that then links to the augmentation on the field, or we could, every time there's a goal score, we can put an ad around the goals, the ball goes in. It becomes an editorial decision as to essentially where you want to put the ad message around the interesting content that you're using to drive the story of the game. So it's all in-game moments, which is a complement to things like squeeze backs, picture in picture, and the kind of sort of, I guess, slightly more traditional, but innovative ad formats.
Yeah. And the fun thing is we're figuring this out right now. This is not live in Liga MX games until July. So the teams are sort of experimenting with how they want to use it and kind of making some decisions on what the top 5 kind of ways they want to use this technology. But really, they're excited about the number of possibilities.
Yes, sir.
A quick one, and thanks for the talk. Really nice. I'm also a Manchester United fan for my sins.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Just a quick question coming from Europe. Do you have any insights into, let's say we talk about the Champions League, ad insertions in that kind of environment, cultural differences? Do you have any insights there about whether that will be coming?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, what I've noticed as a Brit now living in the States and consuming a lot of US sports, there is historically there's been a higher propensity around for fans and all of the kind of media and content around US sports to lean in much more heavily into using stats and data and insights, the very nature of baseball, it's a very kind of, and that isn't something that really existed in European football and soccer, historically. I think that is changing, and I think that is driven by, I think, the availability of some of the data. I think it's changed the sophistication of coaching and performance and the way the teams are working with data now, and how, the difference between Pep Guardiola and Harry Redknapp, right, in terms of how they think about data to analyze it. And I think that is then that is now manifesting in the media experience as well. We we did a lot of work with Amazon around their NFL broadcast on, and we worked with on Prime Vision, which was a very stats heavy alternate broadcast here in the States. They've taken that and deployed that in Europe around their Champions League coverage. We've done a lot with Premier League and the Premier League productions, offering, alternate broadcasts that are very, very stats and insights and data heavy. So I think we're starting from a place of, we're starting from a lower point in terms of, I think, people's like appetite for insights. But I think as it gets, frankly, just more interesting and it becomes more part of the story, that it becomes more commonplace in the game, it's beginning to seep into the media propositions and then the advertising propositions, which is interesting.
Cool. Thanks for asking all the questions.
Yeah,
lots of them.
Thanks for coming, Dan, and thank you for the partnership, and thank you all for coming on a Wednesday lunchtime. I'm sure you're all probably heading off home soon, so thank you very much for the time.
Thanks, guys.